Hi everyone, my name is Zach Goidel and I'm here again for Shred Academy's question and answer video series. For those of you who are unaware, all you have to do is visit the link that's on the screen to submit your own questions. Let's get going. Most of the confusion between 3/4 and 6/8 comes from the fact that they have the same number of notes and are the same duration. However, the feeling between each of those time signatures is drastically different, and that is established by the groupings. So for example, in 3/4, you're going to have 3 quarter notes, or if you were thinking about the eighth notes, they would be grouped as 2 plus 2 plus 2. Now if you're playing in 6/8, you would have 2 dotted quarter notes, and the eighth notes would be grouped as 3 plus 3. Now accents and groupings tend to establish the feel of a meter. There's certain time signatures where you have different feels and things like that. 6/8 always has that sort of stereotypical swaying feel to it. Accents tend to happen at the first beat of every grouping. So in 3/4, if we're talking strictly about eighth notes, where you have 2 plus 2 plus 2, you would have 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. But with 6/8, it would be 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. So you see, even by just those accents, it feels different. That accent could be simply on your guitar where you're palm muting everything but the accent. You're playing a higher note as the accent. Maybe the drummer is handling most of the accents and you're simply just playing the chords. It doesn't matter. The accents tend to happen at the beginning of every grouping. So let's take a look at the same chord progression and same riff, but played one in 3/4, one in 6/8. Again, even though you have the same number of notes, the feel is very different. Those accents and the groupings are establishing a specific mood that is portrayed through the way that you play your guitar and accent certain notes. Without knowing what your goals are, how much time you have to practice, things like that, it's basically impossible for me to give you specific and accurate information on this. However, I can offer some generalized information that helps people to get much more effective with their practice time. The first thing you need to do is establish the amount of time you're going to practice each day. Now, one thing to point out about this is many people have this misconception that you have to practice 8-10 hours a day in order to see substantial results, which is very inaccurate. See, people that have to practice 8 hours a day in order to see substantial results are making very inefficient use of their practice time. The next thing you need to do is divide up your topics. So for example, you could group everything related to scales, everything related to arpeggios and sweep picking, everything related to songwriting, things like that. Now the reason that's important is many people also have this misconception that you need to cover every topic that you're trying to advance in one day. And that's very inaccurate, because what you have to realize is everything you practice is going to bleed into everything else that you practice. So as an example, if you're practicing sweep picking, the two-hand synchronization that you gain from sweep picking is going to bleed over into things like how, when you're picking your scales, how accurate you are with that. Or when you're playing your rhythms, how cleanly you are able to synchronize your two hands together to get the most attack into your rhythm playing. Or whatever the situation is. It holds true that whatever you're practicing will have some effects on everything else that you practice. So don't feel like you have to do it all in one day. One of the things that I've seen work the best for my students is doing either a 2-day or a 3-day rotating practice schedule. Now what I mean by that is if it's a 2-day schedule, they would have like a scale day and an arpeggio day with everything related to those two topics. And then at the end of their practice session or at the beginning of their practice session, they would have a little bit of time devoted to things that aren't strictly technical. Things like chord studies and music theory and improvising, things like that. Now if you have a 3-day schedule, what you would do is you would more likely have a scale day and an arpeggio day and then a creative day where you do more with chord studies and voicings and a little bit of theory, improvising, songwriting, things like that. One other thing to point out is that it is important to have a free day. That way you are able to have sort of just have fun. You know, you're not bogged down by all the technical aspects of your playing, and you can just freely improvise. If you want to on that free day go back and review things, that's totally cool. But it's good to have a day where it's not so rigid, because it allows you to relax and sort of clean your mind out for when you go to practice again. One final thing just to bring up is I would not spend fewer than 20 minutes on a certain topic each day. And so what I mean by that is, let's say you're spending time practicing a particular exercise. I would spend about 20 minutes on that and then move on to something else. I wouldn't spend any less than that, because not only do you have to physically warm up, but mentally you also have to warm up. Many of the problems that guitar players and musicians in general have are mental, where they mentally cannot keep up with the changes that are happening. So don't be afraid to spend more time than that, but 20 minutes should be about the minimum that you work on each individual topic. Like I said, it's impossible for me to give you accurate, specific advice without knowing your goals and more details. But feel free, this holds true to anyone, feel free to email me and I'll help you get your practice schedule sorted out so you can be very effective with your time. A Neapolitan chord is a theoretical concept that is used to break out of the key that you are currently playing in temporarily. It's a dramatic tension device. Now, oftentimes with music theory concepts, it becomes overly complicated. So I've broken down the concept of Neapolitan chords into 3 main points. Point 1 is that it is always a major triad. Point 2 is that it can happen in either a major or a minor key. Any major key, any minor key, you can have a Neapolitan chord. And a Neapolitan chord, for point 3, is always built on the flat 2 of whatever key you are playing in. Let's take a look at a major key, for example. We'll just keep it simple. Say we're playing in the key of C major. Our 2 in C major is normally a D. However, if we flat that, because that's where the Neapolitan is built off of, the flat 2, so you flat the D to make it D flat, and then you build a D flat major triad from there. That is your Neapolitan chord. Or, for example, let's say we're playing in the key of D minor. Our 2 in D minor is normally an E, so we make that E flat, and we make an E flat major triad. Let's take a look at 2 more examples. Neapolitan chords, just like any other theory concept, can be used wherever you want them. However, with devices like this, where they're used specifically 90% of the time to create tension, it's best to put them towards the end of your chord progression. Now, the reason for that is if you put it somewhere in the middle, what's going to happen is it feels like it climaxes in the middle and then the ending is just kind of disappointing. It feels very unbalanced. So, there are 2 main ways that a Neapolitan chord is commonly used. Option 1, which is a little bit more modern, would be simply to play a Neapolitan as your final chord of that progression, where it then repeats or it goes on to another section of music that's in a similar tonality. Now, the other option would be it's a little bit more classical minded, would be having the Neapolitan as the second to last chord, and then having a major 5 chord as your final chord before it goes to the repeat or it moves on to something else in a similar tonality. Now, it's important to specify the major 5 chord part, because major 5 to 1 is going to have a very strong conclusion. It's one of the strongest cadences. So, if you're playing in a major key, that happens naturally. Your 5 chord is major. However, if you're playing in natural minor, your 5 chord is most of the time going to be just a minor 5, so lowercase Roman numeral. However, if it's a major 5, what that's going to mean is temporarily then you have your Neapolitan chord, and then for that major 5 you're going to be in harmonic minor, not natural minor anymore. Because the Neapolitan chord does break out of the key, or modulate, you have to adjust your melodies, your solos, your leads, or any other instrument that's playing with it to work with it as well. And so what this means is, while the Neapolitan chord is being played, you have 3 modes, 3 scales that you can use to play with. So option 1 would be to play Lydian over the Neapolitan chord, and most of the time this is probably the best bet. Now, these modes will start on the root note of your Neapolitan chord. So if we're in the key of F major and we're playing a G flat major, which is our Neapolitan, you would play G flat Lydian. Now, if the other option would be, you could play G flat major, which is a good choice, but a lot of times Lydian will work better. I prefer Lydian over major almost all the time. Now, the third option would be to play G flat mixolydian. Now, one thing to point out with this is, while it is possible, it starts to function less like a Neapolitan chord and much more like a tritone substitution, which is not necessarily the sound you might be looking for when using a Neapolitan chord. So while it does work, a lot of the time it's not the best option. So if you remember those 3 points, it's always a major triad, it is always built on the flat 2, and it can happen in any major or any minor key. You basically know how to use your Neapolitan chord. There are other concepts related to it and other ways of applying it and things, of course, but this is a great way of getting you started. Thanks again, everyone, for joining me today. I had a great time, as always, doing these, and I'm looking forward to the next video in the series. Please remember, submit your questions to the link that's on the screen, and have a great day. Hope you're doing well, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.